Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. This is David O'Rourke, District Superintendent. I've got my holiday mask on that's been made by our staff at Carrier. We're grateful to all of our volunteers that have put together masks for all of our people, and we're grateful to all of you for continuing to comply with our mask policies in the organization. I want to say a little bit more about masks in a minute, but I'm taking it off right now because I'm alone in this room as I create this video for you. And I wanted to specifically have a message that addresses a couple things that we're facing as an organization going into next week and this week, specifically with regard to orange and yellow zones in Erie County, our preparations for the orange and yellow zones, and the likely revision of guidance for orange zones, and also our own safety measures at all of our campuses and sites, and including our masks. So why don't I start with masks? We have a mask requirement presently, which has been that if you're walking, you're wearing, and if you cannot maintain social distancing, you're wearing your mask. And when we say wearing a mask, we mean wearing a mask like this, over the nose and the mouth, not like this. We don't want to see that. We don't want to see it in our kids, and we don't want to see it in our adults. We certainly don't want to be modeling that for our kids. So please make sure that when you are wearing a mask, that it's covering both your nose and your mouth at all times. Secondly, we are moving to a higher standard of mask requirement for the organization, and this is in response to new guidance that's coming out from World Health Organization, as well as our tracking of the studies that are really instrumental in helping understand what we are learning about the transmission of the virus. And that is that masks work, and they're a very important part of our strategy overall. And so up until now, we have required that when you're walking, you're wearing, and when you cannot maintain social distancing, you're wearing a mask. We're moving to a higher standard, which is at all times we expect that staff are going to be wearing a mask when they are not alone in a room. So if you share a space with other workers, that also mean, or with students, that means we're going to be asking that you maintain a mask on at all times. And we also understand that people need breaks from masks. They are sometimes sweaty, they sometimes become humid because of our breath, and so reasonable mask breaks are allowed, and that's at the professional discretion of our staff at this time. But we want to make sure that the spirit of this is adhered to, so we don't have to become even more prescriptive. So we want to see these masks on a lot more, and especially if you are in any space that it has shared people in it, regardless of the distance, it's important that we're maintaining masks more frequently. And at all times with allowances for humane breaks as needed. We will have more specific language on this next week, and please look for that language. If you have questions that come up around that, please, there's our COVID info email address, which you can ask that way, and you can ask a question that way. And I think it's important that we see this as part of our overall net of strategies that we're using to help keep people safe. That's the screenings at the door, the questionnaires, the adherence to the travel requirements that are provided by the state, our use of masks, our maintenance of social distancing. All of those things combined just raise the level of safety and reduce the transmission of virus in our organization. Also, one of the key measures of safety for us is quarantine. And quarantine comes from a health department. It's only the health department that can actually quarantine an individual. However, we are now working cooperatively with both Erie County and Chautauqua County Health Department. And we are, in many cases, after working with the health department, we are contacting our people, parents, children, the parents, and our staff, if we have a known contact of a person who has had the virus. Just because you're a known contact doesn't mean that you're going to get the virus. But what it does is it stops the chain of transmission. And so quarantining itself is a safety measure. It's a safety measure that helps prevent that virus from going to the next person. And the faster we can notify individuals that they're likely to be quarantined by the Department of Health, the sooner they can abide by those rules of avoiding contact with all individuals until the official quarantine comes from the Department of Health. because it's only the Department of Health that has the authority to quarantine an individual. However, when we communicate with an employee or a student, we expect that they're going to comply with that because we're working cooperatively with the Department of Health on the determining who is it that needs to be on that list for quarantine if there's a contact with someone with the virus. It's important to note that very few instances in New York State of transmission of the virus have occurred and been traced out through contacts within school walls. And that's in part because of those layers of protections that we're talking about. I mean, those make a big difference. It's a controlled environment because we have the measures in place. And we can no longer say that we do not have any evidence of any transmissions in Erie County or Chautauqua County at our schools as a result of inside of our walls. We can no longer say that it hasn't happened at all. What we can say is that there are very few, and it's a very, very small percentage of the transmissions of the virus overall, despite the fact that we have a lot of individuals inside of our buildings. And again, that's because of the measures, and it's because of all of your good work and cooperation and adherence to those safety measures. And that includes the masks, the questionnaires, temperature checks, the hand washing, and social distance, and sometimes barriers. So we are also we've had a couple instances in tough lessons in gatherings inside of the schools. So if you have multiple staff that like to eat lunch together, even at a distance, we're discouraging that from happening. We are asking people to spread out, not be in the same space, and because if one person is in that room and we have over an hour of contact cumulatively through the day, regardless of whether they're masks, regardless of social distancing, it's very likely that they could be quarantined, which could affect our staffing. It also ultimately could affect the transmission of the virus. So we're trying to discourage the gatherings of staff throughout our organization for things like lunches, especially when masks are off. We want only those people in the same rooms working together when that's required by work. I know that that's that part of what we get at work is socialization with other adults, and I wish that we could facilitate more of that. We've lost some things, the personal connections as a result of the virus right now. But we know that one day we're going to work our way back, and we'll have that again. But work with us to help us observe that. We're grateful. I want to talk a little bit about yellow and orange zones finally, and the yellow and orange zone designations in Erie County that have occurred, and which may occur in time in Chautauqua County as well. These designations are based on rates of positivity on tests, and by and large, it originally was seen as something that would be isolated to a very small region, but if it's widespread, then the zones could be bigger. And in Erie County, it was ultimately determined that most of the county went to an orange zone, with a few areas in the county in yellow. Yellow zones require that 20% of staff and students combined be tested presently one time, and then if once that screening or once that surveillance testing has occurred, they are permitted to operate as they were before. Orange zones, we believe there's a change in the guidance coming, and we're waiting for the specifics on this, but we believe it will require that 20% of staff and students are tested every month, to maintain operation during an orange zone. So we are working within the frames of these testing requirements to try to get our students back to face-to-face models in the same manner that they were in before the zones were declared. So in our career and technical education programs, we are working toward restoring to a hybrid model. In special ed and alternative ed, we are working to restoring 5-day-a-week attendance for students. And so when we get to the testing thresholds for orange or yellow in those instances, we will be bringing our students back for face-to-face instruction in the same mode that they were in before we had to stop. Excuse me. If you're working in a satellite location, we're going to be tracking along with the program that the school system is operating under. So if that school is testing and returning students and staff, our satellite classrooms will also proceed in the same way. If we're at a campus, then it's on our BOCES to conduct that testing and report the testing results. And so we are coordinating, and John O'Connor is working on ensuring that we're ready to be testing starting next week with our first location that's in the yellow, and we have testing for, and that's going to be our Springville P-TECH. Following that, we are going to be waiting for what happens with our orange sites, and that would be Baker Road and Ormsby. So those are our last week and a half or 2 weeks of work has been trying to organize our thinking and planning to be sure that we can prepare for that. It's also important to note that it's not just the testing that has sometimes prevented us from being fully operational with regard to in-person instruction. Sometimes it's been the levels of staffing and the availability of substitutes. And if it gets below a certain threshold, it may be not feasible that we can operate effectively. And in that case, then we have to move to remote instruction too. So sometimes quarantining and or isolation can impact our operation too. Those typically will be shorter durations, but it is something that we are also accommodating. And again, we're abiding by quarantine because that's the safest thing to do for all of our people. Those are some of the highlights of some of the changes that are coming. I'm sure that there are questions. We are organizing meetings for our yellow and orange zone locations, our campuses. So that'd be Baker, Ormsby, Carrier, and Springville early next week, and also a separate meeting for satellite locations in which we can address for staff that are involved in those locations questions that might be coming up there. So look to John O'Connor's email, which is to come, to announce those changes as we go. At this time, at the time I'm giving this briefing, it looks like Holland will be opening next week and testing in satellites. And it looks like our Springville campus in yellow will also be open and testing. And we are waiting for word from where we're going to be with North Collins as a yellow site. And then all of our orange zones, we're waiting for state guidance to determine how we're proceeding. So even though the governor had a press conference on it, we still need the regulations to actually shape the work that's ahead for us there. I hope that gives you some assurances and clarity of some of the issues that you're wondering about. Also, I know that people will have questions about the masks, but the big picture is we're requiring them. And we're requiring them now, not just when you can maintain, not just when it's possible for you to maintain social distance, but even if you're at social distance in a classroom, we're asking that all staff and students who are medically able wear a mask, and that we provide humane mask breaks at the discretion of the staff and the adults. Same thing would go for all of our AMA employees who work in offices that are shared. If you're in a shared space, we want masks on during the day. If you need a break, take a break. I understand it can get sweaty or it can get humid in there, and we're all abiding by the same precautions. So I hope if you have any questions that you submit them to our COVID info email address, and I hope that you have a good weekend and it helps you find some restoration and recovery from the week. I know it's been a busy week for all of us. Take care, everyone.